Right, good morning and welcome to the 8th Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee meeting of 2020. Can I just remind everybody to turn off any electrical devices, either turn them to silent or turn them off completely so that they don't interfere with the work of the committee. We have received apologies from Jackie Bailey and Colin Beattie, MSP, this morning, so I'd like to welcome Rhoda Grant and John Mason here to substitute. So, can I turn you to the agenda? Item 1 is a decision on taking business in private. So can I ask the committee if they agree to take items 3 and 4 in private?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay. So item 2, we're going to take evidence from the Enterprise and Skills Strategic Board. So I'd like to welcome Nora Senior, who is the chair of the board, Scott McClarty, who is the vice chair, and Richard Murray, who is the interim head of the analytical unit for Scottish Government. Good morning. Nora, would you like to start with an opening statement to the committee?
Thank you. Is that on now?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting us back. It's a pleasure to be able to update you on where we are with the Enterprise and Skills Strategic Board. Just to remind everyone, our task has been to maximise the impact of the collective investment that Scotland makes in enterprise and skills development, and also to create the conditions that are conducive to delivering inclusive and sustainable growth. So just as an update on progress since publishing the strategic plan, which was published in October 2018, within that there were 14 actions, there were 18 recommendations. Pleased to say that the board's export mission has been closed, that the recommendations which were given within that have been absorbed into the Scottish Government's A Trading Nation Export Growth Plan. And similarly in the Future Skills mission, that's been directly informed by, or the recommendations therein were absorbed into the Scottish Government's Future Skills Action Plan. I think one of the key areas where we've seen success is the alignment of the agency's business planning. Their strategic business plans were aligned for the first time, both in terms of the timing of when they were being published and drawn up, and also a timetable which allowed for cross-agency discussion, cross-agency decision-making, and also further discussion collectively with Scottish Government departments. So there was more shape around shared visions, there was more alignment from letters of guidance, and there was more alignment within the content of each of the strategic plans. The focus on collaborative working is continuing. There is a big focus on shifting the culture across the agencies, able to demonstrate a number of joint working arrangements, sharing resources, and that can be seen probably best in the Brexit response steering group, which was formed a few months ago, and also on the collective activity that's been driven around the single entry portal for business and business support. And I think that there are now a number of initiatives around cross-agency working groups and different secondments from the various agencies, both to each other and also to the Strategic Board's Secretariat. Scottish Funding Council and SDS have worked together to appoint a Director of Skills. It is a unique appointment, if you like, responsible to both of the chief executives, helping the alignment of both the planning and investment between the two organisations, so that there is a bigger focus on joining up the agenda on skills and the delivery on skills. And they're both working towards a skills vision for 2035. We're also accelerating our work around how we engage with the wider system, so with local authorities, with industry leadership groups, and we've recently carried out a review of industry leadership groups looking at how they can be galvanised much more effectively to look at sectors and to reach those parts of business that are not currently engaged with any of the enterprise and skills system. We've also worked closely with the agency CEOs around spending review. As you know, the Strategic Board does not have any jurisdiction over the allocation of funding, but we, or not the allocation, but the spend of funding, but we do have a route into giving recommendations around where we think priority areas are going forward. So we did feed into the spending review around business support and ambition, around innovative business models and fair work, around skills alignment, and around how increased collaborative working and shared resources could be more effective. There is more to be done, particularly around driving productivity, around business and a more an even more seamless system for business users and learners. I would just make a quick mention on where our future priorities are going to lie. Hard alignment, greater collaboration is obviously key. There is a focus on the user experience and the effects that the single entry portal and a more collaborative system, what is the effect on business and how are they finding the new dynamic? How is the interface with Scottish Government working more effectively, both between themselves and between the agencies? More clarity around roles, responsibilities, aims and targets. We're looking to continue the missions that we initially focused in on around business models and workplace innovation, around skills, around exports and around business creation and growth. We'll also have a number of deep dives into business models, investment in infrastructure, into innovation, skills alignment and the return on education and skills. We're also looking at more strategic approaches in the longer term to innovation, to climate change and to the learner journey. The focus will be on the user, not on what the agencies can deliver. And then there'll be a focus on joining up the wider system, how we can engage again more effectively with organisations, who both public and private sector, who are not within the enterprise and skills remit that the Strategic Board has, but how do we engage more effectively so that there is much more of a joined up approach towards investment and delivery. Fair work, looking at how that can be embedded much more effectively, not just within the enterprise and skills agencies themselves, but also across the wider business and private sector. So those are our key priorities for the immediate term going forward. They will of course be reviewed as we move forward, looking at various different external options and also based on the evidence that the analytic unit are bringing us on a regular basis and will do on the deep dives. So that's my overview. As an opening statement, very happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I just start with a quick clarification around your missions? You originally had 4 missions, and I understand from the report that 3 of them are now closed, so you only have 1 live one, is that correct?
Well, business models and workplace innovation is still live. Exports, obviously, as I said, has moved into a trading nation. There are targets and there are measurements based within that plan. The Strategic Board's oversight of that will be to ensure that the engagement and the activities that are being done within that plan, the business creation and growth plan and the future skills plan are moving the macro indicators at the top level. The Strategic Board is responsible for measuring. So to answer your question, yes, they are closed but not finitely closed. The board still has oversight of the performance measurement.
Right, because it was too early to actually be able to measure any outcomes.
Yes.
So you're satisfied that by moving them out into those plans, you're still measuring them, you've still
Measuring
got the
them.
same aims, and your intent is still the same, even
Yeah.
though they are not missions under your heading.
Absolutely. The strategic board is exactly that, strategic board. So as these have moved into business as usual, and the activities have become more operational, then the role of the board is to measure whether or not these activities are shifting macro indicators around inclusive economic growth, and we're satisfied that we still have that in place.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I turn to Richard Lyle first of all?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. My question is going to be centred around the aims of Enterprise and Skills Review, ESR. I note the aim of ESR was to significantly improve enterprise and skills support to help Scotland progress towards achieving the Scottish Government's aim of ranking among the top quartile of the OECD countries. It's now almost 4 years since the ESR was launched in May 2016. Is the Strategic Board confident this aim can be achieved, and what areas of review have progressed well and where is there room to improve?
Okay, I'll maybe kick off and then I'll pass to Richard if that's fine. Scotland is still in the second quartile. We are 16th out of 36 OECD countries, but we are between that range, if you like. We are in first quartile for high-level qualifications. We're in fourth quartile for capital investment. Overall, we are 16th. That hasn't shifted. I think the last time I was here I did mention that part of the challenge around moving up to the upper quartile or the top quartile is that those countries that are already in the top quartile are continuing to increase and drive their own economic growth. So although long-term indicators show that there is a positive shift, it is going to take up, because the top countries are already moving again, the gap kind of remains consistent, so it becomes quite difficult for us to show a significant shift quickly over a certain period of time, and we would need a change of about 33 billion in GDP, a move of 21% in order to catch up with some of those countries. But Richard, you can maybe add to that in terms of any performance.
Very quickly, and apologise for the noise. We have some issue with the venting window, so anybody who's watching this who can hear it, that is the problem. It's not on your television. There is somebody coming, hopefully, to deal with it.
I would just add to Nora's points, the fact that the Enterprise and Skills Review mentioned it was a long-term target of around about sort of 20-year time horizon. Within the annual analysis, it highlights that a number of the indicators have actually shown some improvement over the longer term, so not just over a 1 or 2 year period. So progress has been made, but as Nora highlighted, that obviously the top OECD countries are continuing to improve as well, so that gap has remained.
So as other countries have moved ahead, we're still following them, and basically we're still keeping pace. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, that is what I'm saying. And in terms of, if you look at how Scotland's compared to the UK, so Scotland has actually closed the productivity gap with the UK since the financial crisis. It was about 10%. Now the gap is about sort of 2%. So it has made progress in closing the...
22?
Yep. In terms of closing the performance, the productivity gap with the UK. But of course, the problem has been that the UK has had very weak productivity growth during that period, which has enabled Scotland to close that gap. Scottish productivity has been about 1% per annum, which has generally been below its longer term trend. But there has been progress against the UK.
Okay, thanks for that. But it still shows that we are improving and we are maintaining behind the countries that we want to follow and join.
Could I just add to that, that we have shown improvement in R&D spend in exports, in skills profile and educational attainment, and the number of businesses. So there are certain categories where Scotland is moving or has shown movement in the right direction, not reflected for the very reasons that Richard said in the shift in place, but the indicators are showing that there is a move in the right direction.
Yeah, we're going in the right direction. Okay, Basically, another aim is to ensure a simpler and more coherent enterprise and skills support system. The annual analysis report shows that Scotland's innovation landscape is crowded with over 90 programmes in operation across Scotland. What action have been taken to overcome this type of challenge, and do we really need 90 programmes?
Well, to answer that, absolutely not. I think we do have a piece of work underway at the moment to look at innovation, and there is a deep dive which is coming up during the year. Richard, you have been working with Mark Graham, so you can maybe say a couple of words about the innovation landscape.
Sure, absolutely. It's fair to say that a number of different innovation programs try to do slightly different things, but I think you're right to highlight the significant volume. What the annual analysis also highlighted is that there's limited evidence of in terms of the scale of impact a number of these initiatives have, and as Nora touched on, the deep dive for the board later on this year will do exactly that, to look at in greater detail what work is been done to draw out the key impacts from these different innovation activities, because they do span a range of things in terms of directly supporting universities to directly supporting business R&D grants. So it's quite a wide spectrum, but the landscape is very cluttered.
Yeah, I know it's hard, just to finish off, I know it's hard to cut things down, and also to encompass all the things that you're trying to encompass, but I think 90 is a bit over the top. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
In terms of that, can I just ask, with 90 programmes available, what are you doing to enable organisations to actually engage effectively with such a big programme offer?
Again, that's a really good question. I would say that of those 90 programmes that are out there, not all of them fall under the enterprise and skills agencies that the 5 that the Enterprise and Skills Board look at. But the reason that we wanted to look further afield was to see where there is duplication, what would be better done by some other organisations that are out with the enterprise and skills agencies? Are there people better positioned to do that? So that's what we will make recommendations around that. It won't be up to the strategic board to do that, but we will be able to guide the enterprise and skills agencies perhaps on those areas that they're already involved in. What are we doing about how to engage more with business? Depending on where the entry point is for business to engage, we are looking at, again, the single entry portal. We're looking at how business engages directly with the agencies at the moment, and also in the ILG review that we're looking at, we've also made some recommendations around how industry leadership groups can be better, or can better signpost businesses within certain sectors towards funding for innovation, or resources for embedding innovation within their type of company. We are also looking at organisations around interface, and may well make some recommendations in further support of that.
I mean, with so many programmes, is there not a concern that there's a loss of economies of scale, because each of these programmes will have an administration budget attached to them? And I think, as we heard this week, the enterprise companies run out of money, so they're not giving out, because the costs of running all these things becomes prohibitive in terms of the amount of money that's distributed for enterprise. So how much have you looked at the overall kind of cost of running such a complex maze of programmes?
I can't say that we have done an analysis of that that we would be able to report back on at the moment. The strategic board will probably look at the overall cost of some of those, but given that we don't have any, we might have influence, but we don't have any responsibility for allocation of funding, we would be able to make recommendations where we might suggest there might be rationalisations, or whether there should be enhancements, but we will not have any direct responsibility for allocation of funding.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, final question, in terms of having programmes, are the companies having to fit the programmes, or are the programmes fitting the companies?
Very good question. Richard?
I'm not able to answer that, but I think it would be something that we could bring back to the committee in terms of kind of evidence from the different programmes and the nature of the companies involved.
To answer your question, I think it's too early for us to be able to say, because the research project is ongoing at the moment. Therefore, the findings have not been reported back to the Enterprise and Skills Board and won't be until June this year. Is it June or September? There will be an update in June. Part of what we hope to end up with is some kind of measurement scale where we'll be able to see where the investment in innovation makes most return, and make some recommendations round about that. What is actually making business be able to function more effectively, where the adoption of new innovations, say through higher education, are having most effect, but looking at where investments are made at the moment and where is the best return on investment, or how do we measure that so that we can make some evidenced recommendations rather than just a guess.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh yes, sorry.
Sorry, if I could just add, from a business perspective, some of the evidence we'd expect to see, and we do need to do the analysis, experience would tell you that probably some of the bigger companies are using the innovation more than the middle companies, the SMEs. And I think one of the things we'll expect to see from other data sources that I'm involved in, you'll see a lack of use of the SMEs. So linking back to the business models and workplace innovation mission, which isn't complete yet, we are looking at how we encourage SMEs to get more involved in innovation. So I agree the landscape's too crowded, but equally the access to the landscape is probably not at the right level in the middle level companies.
I would agree with that. If there's nothing to add on this one, if anybody's got any further questions, I'm just going to suspend for 1 minute while we open the windows so that we don't have a repeat of the problems, because apparently if we do that, it'll make sure we don't have any more interference. So can we suspend the committee just for a minute? Thank you. Okay. Thank you for your perseverance. And can I move now to Willie Coffey?
Thanks very much, Convener. Laura, I wonder if we could talk a wee bit about the board's performance framework. I think a number of the members want to ask some questions in and around that area and the 6 elements of SOAN that are in the framework. First of all, I mean, could you tell us, are these things generally accessible to the public? Do you publish these things to make them open and accessible, or is it basically internal and for people like us to see this kind of information?
I mean, I shall let Richard touch on performance framework. You quite rightly mentioned 6 elements that monitors Scotland's progress towards productivity, well-being, equality, sustainability. We've just done our first annual analysis. It's probably a little bit too soon in the process to be able to populate the whole performance framework, which was created by the analytic unit. However, to answer your question, yes, it will be. We're looking at establishing an interactive model that will be on the Strategic Board's website. So once that begins to get populated, anyone can access that. And similarly, the annual analysis is already housed on the website. So the information there is accessible to share very usefully.
I mean, the question I had, I mean, the charts and the framework and so on are very, you're always drawn to these kinds of things in your reports, and they're really very interesting. I'm interested in the comments in your report about the kind of sub-national, regional side of this. How does decisions about enterprise and skills get informed by the regional picture across Scotland, for example? And I'll take, for example, my own area, Ayrshire. So how would I see as an Ayrshire MSP that we're in the right, in the right track in terms of enterprise and skills for Ayrshire, for example? Do you produce regional analyses like this for Ayrshire and other parts of Scotland?
There is regional data, but Richard, you'd be best explaining how you...
Sure. So the one part of the performance framework is the interactive dashboard, and within the interactive dashboard we have national and regional data. That regional data isn't sort of new data, it's data that already is publicly available, but what we've done is bring it together in an accessible format. We're almost at the stage of being able to publish that, but there is a similar toolkit that's already available called the Inclusive Growth Diagnostic, which enables you to do exactly that, to look at individual local authorities' performance along a range of indicators and compare it to similar local authorities to see where some of the key challenges are. So that information is already available, but we are looking to publish our own interactive dashboard, which would enable another tool to enable you to really drill down below the national level.
I mean, ultimately, I want to see as an Ayrshire MSP economic growth in Ayrshire, and there's clearly reliance on things like the growth deals that are in place. There's the whole apprenticeship stuff and that's going on too. But how can I see a positive influence and let's say a closing of the gap between Ayrshire and Scotland in terms of economic growth and employment and so on? Is this helping us to do that, or to see where we need to apply some attention and more focus?
It will, or that's the position that we hope to get to. Obviously, we collect data from each of the agencies, we collect external data, and we collect Scottish Government data, and take a fresh look at it to make our own assessments. And as Richard said, as we begin to populate that framework, then we will drive out of that key indicators that will have a sense of place. So that will then inform decisions around investment in skills, or the direction that we give towards the agencies in terms of skills, in terms of business growth, in terms of the industry leadership groups and how we might ask them to focus in on key sectors, or what specific sectors might need what kind of help. So as we move forward in this process, then collectively we should have the ability to be able to analyse regional data much more effectively, to give some performance measurements about what is working, what's not working, because one size will not fit all. And I think that that's where the sense of place is really important to the strategic board, that the model that fits perhaps in a big city like Glasgow is not what's going to happen in Inverness. So how do we flex so that we can engage with the agencies in a meaningful manner that will drive local economic growth?
Yeah. Do you think Scottish Enterprise, for example, rediscovering its kind of regional focus, which in my view it had lost really in recent years, will help us to see what we need to do in, for example, Ayrshire, to try and close some of the gaps even within Scotland for us? Is that where we're heading with this? Because I hope it is, because it sounds quite encouraging if that's where we're going.
I mean, as I mentioned, the sense of place is extremely important and has been, one of the key areas of influence, as particularly among the business people on the board. It will be. It's not just the enterprise agencies that need to focus on this. Again, as I mentioned, one of the priorities moving forward is how do we get system-wide engagement so that the enterprise agencies aren't falling over what local authorities are doing, are not falling over what private sector and trade associations are doing, and not falling over what industry leadership groups are trying to do. So there needs to be more joining up of an approach. So I think that everyone will have much more of a regional focus moving forward, which can only be good for the national context as well.
Last question. So, if when you come back next year to see us, and if I'm able to ask the same question, will I be able to see a trend of any description for my part of Scotland, as will other members, I'm sure, be interested in their part of Scotland, with respect to some of these indicators? We'll be able to see
The
that.
Strategic Board is extremely interested in regional data, so you will be able to access that as it goes online, so hopefully you won't have to wait until we're in this room next year to be able to answer that.
Great, thank you.
Can I go to John Mason, please?
Thanks so much, convener. A couple of areas kind of following on from what Willie Coffey was asking. One, I noticed under the productivity chart, skills underutilisation. I just wondered if you could say something about that. I mean, does that mean we've got the wrong kind of work and we're needing to get better work to match people's skills? Or does it mean we've put young people into the wrong programme, like we've sent too many to university and not enough to do apprenticeships, for example? Can you expand on that at all?
Well, partly this would be from the evidence, and Richard can perhaps talk to that, and partly from your own experience in business, Scott. We have, a strong education system, and as I say, for high-level qualification attainment, we are in first quartile, one of the leading countries that does that. What we've never really done successfully is look at what are the types of industries. We don't have a national asset register. It's been pulled together, but we don't have oversight of what our skills needs in the future are. I think SDS has very good data analysis, and we're beginning to flex and change. But we haven't really looked at what are the skills needs of future areas. So around climate change, for instance, we haven't really done deep analysis. It is happening, but we're not quite there yet. And I think that that's where there is a disconnect between the attainment and qualification and the types of jobs that we have to offer within this country, and why business always feels that we don't have the skills that we need in order to drive business forward. But I'm going to ask Scott just to make a comment.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Nora, and I think there is a strong push. I think we've seen towards university. What we're trying to look at is the lifelong learning and how we do upskilling in the workplace. So workplace upskilling is a key part of what we do. How do we get the universities, the colleges to provide people who maybe are not the young population in midlife learning, and how we do that is a need for the businesses. What we have been having a conversation on the board is engaging even through some of the missions with the trade bodies and looking at, Nora mentioned the ILGs, and having a wider discussion about what the needs of industry are and how we align to that, the education system to that. So I think we're looking more in terms of how we continually educate people, not necessarily focusing just at the front end of the education system, but how we do education as we go through the work-life career base. And that's very important to industry, so I think we're having the right conversations around that now.
I mean, presumably this is kind of the kind of reason that the Strategic Board now exists, is to try and bring all this together.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what's happening because you exist that wouldn't have happened if you didn't exist?
Well, I think from a personal perspective, there's a business voice on. I think one of the strong things is a business voice there, and we're engaging with certainly the wider conversations happening with the cross-agency collaboration. Certainly see that happen a lot. The conversation we're having just now with business input is also bringing in people like the missions have brought in other stakeholders. So when we're designing the outcomes of the missions, we're looking at how we engage with, I mentioned ILGs that represent industry. We've also got trade bodies connected into that in a wider conversation with industry. So I think we're having the right conversations with industry chairs and the CEOs, with the agency chairs and the CEOs in terms of actually driving a more cohesive plan. The conversations I'm having with my industry counterparts are much more aligned to even simple things like the language we use when we talk to industry is important. It's a different language that you use inside some of the agencies, and that conversation and engagement, I think, is at a different level now.
Can I just add to that? Two things I think we are doing differently in terms of approach. One is the type of evidence that we're gathering and using, and secondly is the alignment of business plans, which didn't happen before. Each of the agencies had their own timetable and their own process for producing business plans. Given that the Strategic Board has now ensured that that business planning process is much more aligned, I think that there is a greater focus on looking at the overall shape and structure of what our skills system needs to look like in order to deliver the needs for Scotland moving forward. So I think it's a different approach.
Okay, thank you. And the second area I wanted to touch on was equality, and, well, particularly around gender pay gap and such like. I mean, this committee has done a considerable amount of work in the past on gender pay gap, and the first question is how you actually measure it, because, I mean, I think the median gender pay gap for all employees was the figure we kind of looked at, which was around maybe 15, 16, 17%, that kind of level. Your gender pay gap, I haven't looked into the details, but I mean, we're talking about like 7%. And I mean, it does seem to me, if I'm understanding this correctly, we've got a red figure for this year, but for the 5-year trend, it's a green figure. Are we clear, or are all the organisations you're involved with clear as to what we're measuring, why we're using a particular measure?
Yes, I can answer that. So in terms of the gender pay gap, so all the indicators in the annual analysis are from the National Performance Framework. So they are consistent metrics of performance. And so similarly, the agencies, as Nora touched on, when they're aligning their business plans to the Scottish Government's kind of aims and objectives as set out in the National Performance Framework, they're using the same measures. And you're right to highlight the fact that what the report shows is that the latest data showed a deterioration, but actually the 5-year trend had been one of improvement in terms of gender pay gap. And interestingly, what the report also highlights is some of the significant improvements on reducing the gender pay gap in rural areas. So there was a specific report that the Scottish Government undertook which highlighted that the gender pay gap had narrowed significantly in mainly rural areas as well. So,
I mean, when this committee did work on this before, when I was a member of the committee, I'm not anymore, but there was a feeling, rightly or wrongly, that like Scottish Enterprise especially, and perhaps HIE as well, really just wanted to get jobs and businesses into the area, and they didn't really care too much whether it was run by men or women or anything like that. Is there a change in that? Is that something you can influence?
Well, that's certainly something, I mean, that was obviously before my time if that was their targets. I think that the measurement framework is different. So equality, sustainability and well-being are areas that the Strategic Board do look at as macro performance measurements. Our instruction to the enterprise and skills agencies is to look at those macro performance indicators, and if one of them isn't shifting, then that's where the Strategic Board comes back to the agencies and asks them to identify what they are specifically doing within that area to support that macro performance indicator. So equality being one of those indicators is something that the Strategic Board will track on an ongoing basis.
Can I just clarify, are you therefore suggesting that you would operate positive discrimination in terms of giving assistance to companies? Is that what you're saying?
It's not really for the Strategic Board to decide operationally who receives money or doesn't receive money. Our focus would be on, is equality shifting as a performance indicator across the whole of Scotland? And if it is, then that means that some of the activities that the individual agencies are carrying out are having a positive effect. If it's not shifting as a macro indicator, then that's where, as I say, we would come back and say to the agencies, what is it that you are doing within this area that is not shifting this or is shifting it? So should we be doing more or less of that? But we wouldn't actually make the decision on the agencies as to what activities they carry out.
All right, okay, but there would be a degree of, it's just a suggestion.
There would be an indication of travel, but the agencies have their own boards, and there would be letters of guidance which would come from ministers. We do have an influence and an input through recommendation as to what should appear in letters of guidance. But ministers will set the letters of guidance which give that direction of travel. We look at the priorities that ministers have set. We look at the evidence that the analytic unit brings us. If we are, the clear remit, as I said, is moving towards inclusive economic growth along sustainability, well-being, equality. So it would be one of those areas where we would say, this is not happening. How do we collectively support a movement in this direction by working together?
Okay, thank you. Gordon MacDonald, do you want to?
Yeah, I
offer
was wanting to
this
ask some questions. It's more sort of general questions about the performance indicators. So we've touched on some of what I wanted to ask you about, but for instance, productivity. You highlighted in your report quite rightly that Scotland's average productivity growth has been 1% as opposed to the UK's 0.3 over the last 10, 12 years, and we've closed that productivity gap. But when you look at the performance indicators, it highlights that there's no change, and that against, I presume, OECD comparisons, we're still in the second quartile. So could you say something about that? Because obviously we've got two governments that have got influence in this area, and yet it looks as if there's been no change, but your report says differently.
Well, productivity performance in an economy is influenced by a range of factors, so it's sometimes very difficult to precisely pinpoint what needs to change in terms of raising performance, whether that's in terms of physical capital or human capital. But Richard, your area of expertise.
Sure, no, absolutely. So you're right in terms of the annual analysis highlights that Scotland's productivity ranking hasn't changed, so it's reported as amber. What I touched on earlier on was that Scotland's relative performance against the UK, which is not something that's reported in the diagram, has been strong in terms of we actually have narrowed the gap with the UK. It's worth highlighting that most of your advanced economies have actually experienced a reduction in productivity growth since the financial crisis. The great productivity puzzle isn't just the UK; it's a number of other economies that have had that. So what you see is Scotland's international performance has been there's been no change in terms of our position, but against the UK there has been some improvement.
Yeah, sorry.
Can I just add to that the David Hume Institute did produce an estimate between the productivity gap between Scotland and the top OECD countries. But their outcome of that was that they attributed that more to the investment in physical capital and total factor productivity, I think is how you refer to it. So those are areas which are slightly out with the enterprise and skills remit, which is why I go back to the point about, shifting productivity is not just about, business support and skills development.
We, in an earlier session at this committee, we looked at the lack of data relating to Scotland's economic performance. And we've already mentioned, Richard, you said that in your report there is no reporting Scotland's relative performance against the UK. Is that an omission from the report? Because what you've got is you've got various rankings. Some of them are international comparisons and some of them are UK comparisons. Given that the ONS produces data for Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland and Wales in the 10 English regions, should we not be reporting Scotland's performance against the regional data that ONS already produces, given that we have got the two governments that both influence on Scotland's productivity? Would that not be helpful to see where we could lever our performance relative to the rest of the UK, where we have influence, but for instance, international exporting, yes, we can promote Scottish companies to export abroad, but trade agreements are going to be made by the UK government. So should there not be more analysis relating to Scotland's performance against the UK and also Scotland's international performance?
Okay, so the annual analysis looks at Scotland's performance against the OECD countries. That reflects the aims set out within the Scottish Government's economic strategy around Scotland being in the top quartile for productivity, well-being, sustainability and equality. So that's why the international focus. Some aspects we don't have comparable Scottish data with the OECD, so we've looked at comparing Scotland with the UK. So that's why there are some metrics that have comparisons against the UK. It's fair to say that we have comparisons for the UK for all of these metrics, so there wouldn't be a problem to have that to accompany the report with that type of analysis, and we can take that forward for the next annual analysis, because that data does exist,
Yeah.
but our focus has been on international.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it would be helpful to highlight, you know, the likes of the equality and well-being. You know, we're looking at gender pay gaps, we're looking at people that earn less than the living wage. And yes, in terms of people earning less than the living wage, you've quite rightly indicated that Scotland's in the top quartile. But income inequality, gender pay gap, we aren't. Yet Scotland is performing far better than the rest of the UK in terms of the gender pay gap, etc.
No, I think you make a good point. As Richard said, that information does exist in the Chief Economist, focuses on those comparisons. So we do look at those. The remit, or from the board, being the focus on OECD countries, that was the guidance that we gave to the analytic unit, which is why it's focused more on that. And we do have an ongoing piece of work looking at performance gaps between Scotland and successful OECD countries in those areas. So we look more at OECD countries, but get fed in from the Chief Economist's office, from Gary Gillespie, those key areas that are more focused on UK. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Can I move to Dean Lockhart, please?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. The new Economic Action Plan announced last month announced that a new single digital entry point would be available to bring together all the enterprise support across the different initiatives we've heard about. A couple of questions on that. The new website, as I understand it, is still work in progress. Are you able to give us a sense of how complete that website is in terms of covering all the enterprise support available? And the website will be in addition to existing websites, including the Scottish Government website, which act as signposts for enterprise support. Is there a risk of duplication and further clutter in terms of guiding people to what's available?
So the actual website, the test website, went live in January of this year, so it's actually up from it, and it's going forward for beta testing. Really the objective of it, first of all, is really about getting a single entry point for businesses. So personally, I'm very supportive of it and quite excited by it, because I think it actually drives a number of objectives in terms of actually driving further collaboration across the agencies. It's quite confusing as a business if you want to approach the agencies for support. This intends to bring it together in one place. The reason, so we do need to further enhancements of it. We're going to promote it, to your point, on as a cluttered landscape. We need to look at that, and I think there's some more marketing to be done. But first of all, we're doing it through Fine Business Support. Is a place where we'll do it. But I think from a rationalisation of services, a rationalisation of how business actually access that, and equally if you can go in and search for services, I think it is absolutely the right thing to do. I've been quite impressed by the plan that sits behind it, and as we roll this out and market it and further enhance it, I think it will bring a significantly enhanced service and potentially cost savings round about how we drive a sharper service to business, and also for me it will also generate the ability in some cases for self-help. I think we're having quite a debate about account managed businesses versus some businesses don't really need that level of service, and they can go in and access services and find information themselves. So I think overall it's the right thing to do. We need to find its place and promote it properly, and we still are working through the best way to do that, but we certainly need some kind of campaign to place it in the market properly, and to your point, make sure it's not lost in amongst other things. But I think this should come to the fore as the main entry point.
Good, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Just in terms of giving us an idea of how complete the website is, are you able to give a rough ballpark percentage of how far down the line the website is in terms of being the finished product? And is there a related question about budgets and timescales? Is there a budget for the completion and a timescale for the completion of the website?
My understanding is the beta testing's done. We're working through that just now. I've reviewed the plan and along with the rest of the board. Hard to put a figure on it. I would say it's in excess of 80% complete. It's certainly getting near the last finalisation of it. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the launch date is May. I'm not quite sure of that, but it's certainly very soon.
I think it will remain in beta format for probably a while longer. And I don't think we should underestimate the huge amount of work that it's taken to get here, because the amount of services across the wider system, and this is not just the enterprise and skills agencies, this is also looking at, you know, other organisations, Business Gateway, local authorities, all of whom deliver different types of business support in one form or another. So as we open the door, there are more people that want to come and join this kind of collaborative enterprise. So I think it will remain in beta for a bit longer. And then we need to work on, as Scott said, search engine optimization, signposting of businesses to come through this one single entry point rather than that will absorb the rest.
Yeah, thank you. I guess by its very nature, it's going to be an evolving process, a live website. Question on the wider question on digital penetration in Scotland. The last time the panel was here, it was highlighted that 9% of firms in Scotland embed digital in their daily operations, and that compares to 43%, for example, in some competitor countries. Are you seeing any change in that level of digital penetration in the Scottish economy?
I haven't got exact figures. You may well have them, Richard. Anecdotally, and partly because the reason that we focused in on workplace innovation, business models and workplace innovation, is because the adoption of digital, we were lagging behind. The joint skills plan that is being drawn up by SFC and SDS, there is a huge part of digital which runs through like a stick of rock, where digital is core to the delivery of the future skills action plan. But I don't think we pulled out particularly, or you might tell me something different.
No, I don't have that figure at hand, but we're happy to get that information from colleagues and send that to the committee.
Good, that'd be useful, thank you. And if I may, just one follow-up question. In previous questions, you referenced inclusive economic growth, and I think this has been one of the sort of standing issues the committee has asked different panels in terms of what inclusive economic growth means. Previously, we saw that it meant different things to different agencies, and therefore you couldn't really have that hard alignment because agencies were pursuing different objectives in some respects. Is there now a standard definition across all the enterprise agencies by which inclusive economic growth is going to be measured going forward?
Have we finalised it? No. Is there a set of words which is in circulation? Yes. So fair work and inclusive growth, there is a group which was brought together across all the agencies to look specifically at that. We also worked with Graham Smith, who is co-convener of the Fair Work Convention. He and Patricia Finlay have been guiding us on a form of words which will, in plain English, which will look at inclusive growth. So I don't think we're quite there yet, but we are working on it.
And just, sorry, final question. I was interested, the report shows a decline in entrepreneurialism in Scotland. Why, very briefly, why do you think there has been that decline?
Hard to say, to be honest, but from a overall, I think that's one of the in terms of the business models and workplace innovation mission, it's a question we have there in terms of how we engage more small to medium enterprises. So I think, personally, my view is large companies do quite well on that, but we need to help leadership. I think leadership training and entrepreneurial skills is something that we need to deploy as part of the missions that's left. But leadership training and entrepreneurialism, I think, is something that can be encouraged and trained, and I think it's more about engagement with SMEs and driving that skill set and behaviour. Personally, that would be my view on that.
And one of the things we looked at in terms of the Future Skills Action Plan, from the evidence that we've looked at in junior school, there is a good focus on entrepreneurialism and creating that kind of innovation within young people. When we get to senior school, the focus becomes very much on academic achievement, and that's where we seem to fall down compared to OECD countries on having, or we lose that kind of entrepreneurial flair. So again, that's an area that both the skills agencies are looking at in terms of skills of the future.
Thank you.
A little follow-up to that is, do you think there is an issue for companies, particularly SMEs, engaging with some of the enterprise agencies, particularly Scottish Enterprise, because before you can actually get an answer to, is there anything you can do to help me, you have to sign up as a client, and to sign up as a client you have to put in quite a lot of effort, and a lot of SMEs step away from that on the basis, well, if I can't even get an answer to the question as to whether you can do anything for me, I haven't got time to go through a whole process of becoming your client, which then equally goes into the stats as somebody they're helping, even though they may not have actually done anything for them. And the feedback I'm getting from SMEs is that puts them off, and therefore they don't get involved in the first place.
Excellent point, and I think that that's where the strategic board started off 2 years ago, looking at what is the experience for a user, irrespective of what size or sector they come from. Our Scottish Enterprise is obviously focused on account-managed companies of different sizes. One of the key areas of collaborative activity that we task the agencies with is how do you make the user journey much more easy, how do you make it much more seamless and easier to access. So although we have the single entry portal, actually it's the work behind the scenes about how you collectively look at cross-agency teams for delivery of certain things, or even contracts. How do you make contracts easier rather than have to sign up to 4 or 5 different agencies? But SMEs don't always need to come to come through Scottish Enterprise. They may go through Business Gateway, which isn't within the enterprise and skills remit that the strategic board looks at. We have a discussion around whether it should be further joined. But going back to one of the priorities that I mentioned before, that collaborative alignment is really important, so that it shouldn't matter which part of the system a company enters into. And given that 99% of our companies are small medium-sized enterprises or micros, that's why we've looked at what more can industry leadership groups do in terms of signposting, support, investment, mentoring, partnerships, things that are important that can help SMEs, rather than just going to either a government portal or an enterprise outlet. But you are quite right. It's difficult for SMEs who do not have time to go through a long process in order to access support.
Yes, I wonder if there are barriers that actually could be addressed, and also there is a lack of proactive seeking out, if you like, of companies. So a lot of companies don't actually engage, and they might be high growth, but they're not being sought out. The enterprise companies and the support mechanisms are just waiting for people to come to them.
Yes.
So I think that's another area.
Yeah.
Can I move to Andy Whiteman, please?
Thanks very much indeed, Convener. Just a few questions. In response to an earlier question from John Mason, you said that we don't have a national asset register. What is that, and why is that important?
As a business person, why do I think that's important?
What is it first?
Well, a national asset register, where are there clusters of companies and skills? So in Aberdeen, you might have oil and gas expertise, as we know, but how could then that be flexed to look at future demand for, say, renewable energy? Predominance of engineers, what other sectors could those, or what, if you were attracting inward investment from an engineering company, would you not signpost them to Aberdeen rather than to perhaps Glenrothes, where there was not a predominance of engineers? We don't have oversight really of where there is which colleges are teaching which skills, which universities are doing research into particular areas, and we don't have, we are gaining it, but we have in pockets an idea of where businesses are based, or clusters of businesses, sectors are based. But we don't have, it's another area that we will ask industry leadership groups to look at, so that we have a roadmap of where our expertise lies. And if you look at some of, you know, our competitors, Singapore or some of the Scandinavian countries, part of their economic growth has come about because they have proactively and intentionally grown certain sectors within certain economic areas. So place has been important, but clusters of skills have been important.
I'm very surprised we don't have that information.
Well, we do probably have the information, but it is in different pockets and it's not joined up.
Okay, so that's something you see as your job.
Yeah.
Yep. In the looking at this supporting annex to the annual analysis report, in figure 5 on page 8, which is looking at the comparison indicators, you have under carbon footprint. It says Scotland's a world leader in terms of calculating its carbon footprint. Internationally comparable data is not yet available. Can you explain that? There's reams of data from the UN and the World Bank.
I think the issue is around we have certain metrics, but they're not necessarily calculated on the same basis as other countries. I'm happy to provide further information on that. All the information that we've got in the annual analysis is based on published information within the National Performance Framework, and where international comparisons aren't available, we've used as similar as possible, but happy to come back in more detail on that metric.
Okay, that'd be useful. Thanks. I look forward to that. Can you say something a little bit more about how your relationship with local authorities and Business Gateway has progressed over the last year? Obviously, it's not part of it wasn't part of the review, and it does operate autonomously within local authorities. But you know, where have those conversations got in terms of alignment or data sharing or whatever?
Well, Richard can answer on data. You might talk about local interaction, and then I'll maybe just give a few thoughts on how we're using Solus and some of the other COSLAs. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so we are having, it's not part of the remit of the board, but we have, during our missions and during our projects, engaged with local authorities and engaged with major stakeholders. So we are expanding our network to make sure we're getting inputs from all of those. We've had quite a lot of dialogue at the board about Business Gateway and how we connect with Business Gateway. It's not, we see it as an extremely valuable tool, and it's delivering locally, so we've had some engagement with them, but we don't actually have them on the board, and it's a conversation we've had about whether we should or should not have them on the board, but at the moment that's not where we're at. I think from a, Mr Coffey mentioned local the regional deals and the regional the Ayrshire growth deal and those types of things. So we've been connecting with the councillors and making sure we understand how we connect to that as well. But I think generally it's just about making sure the conversations there are connected to the aims of the board and the aims of the missions and the outcomes for that. So the conversation is really about making sure those stakeholders are connecting to the board and may take on board their considerations.
Just in terms of local data, within the interactive dashboard that we're developing, that will capture local economic information and social information as well, so that it's easily accessible and brought together in one place.
I mean, would be interested in your thoughts on, whether or not or how the join up ought to be. From our perspective, because Business Gateway or local authorities sit within a different portfolio, we engage through Stephen Heddle, who's member of COSLA, who sits on the board, so he reports back through to COSLA. But we also engage with Solus, and our latest discussions are around inviting a member of Solace to be an observer at the board as and when there are areas that we think it would be of mutual benefit to be able to discuss. From a user's perspective, I don't think a user really knows the difference between a business gateway and a Scottish enterprise, etc. They do through the branding, but for them it should be one joined up system.
Yes, I mean, from business point of view, that's very, very important. I think, obviously, the committee will have further reflections on where we think this relationship should go. On data, the annual analysis provides a lot of useful data. We did an inquiry on economic data. I just want to ask Mr Murray how generally you found Scotland's economic data, and are there any significant gaps?
Sure. So I mean, there's a wealth of data available. I think there's a number of kind of developments in the last few years that have expanded our knowledge, understanding of some of the dynamics within the Scottish economy. The Scottish National Accounts Project, particularly, has been able to dissect and explore greater detail the elements within the Scottish economy in terms of looking at different approaches to measuring GDP. What the analytical unit has been actively involved in is utilising administrative data as well to help explore some of the impacts of different initiatives. So, for example, one of the biggest projects that's underway at the moment is to track and measure the returns to post-school education and skills. And for that, what we're using is administrative data held by HMRC in terms of earnings data, and we're linking that to the qualifications people have gained from the system. So it's not just the sort of the high-level macro data that we're utilising, but also looking to utilise administrative sources as well to get a greater sense of what's the performance within the system.
So you've got access to HMRC administrative data?
We have access to PAYE data, and we're linking that to the educational attainment data to inform the board on the returns across the whole education and skills system. So that a big evaluation is underway at the moment that utilises that data.
Okay, and finally, in paragraph 19 of your annual analysis report, you say there are significant evidence gaps on the causes of Scotland's productivity underperformance. By the 2020 annual analysis, you should have a clearer understanding. How are you going to achieve that better understanding? What's going to make the difference between this report and the one that we'll get in 10 months' time or so?
Okay. The big difference will be that we are in the process of commissioning research which will do exactly that. We'll dissect Scotland's productivity performance and look at greater detail at the specific drivers between why Scotland has underperformed over the longer term against a selection of OECD countries. So it will be able to, we hope, quantify the different components within the productivity puzzle to expand on our knowledge and understanding as why we have underperformed. So that is underway at the moment and is due to report in the autumn this year. So that research will shed new light on.
But it says there's evidence gaps. I mean, that implies that there's information we simply don't have. You're talking about doing further research. Is that primary research to get new data? Or is it a more sophisticated analysis of existing data?
It's the latter, so it's a more sophisticated use of existing data, particularly using new data sources at the EU level as well. So there's new information, new data sources that are able to get underneath the bonnet of productivity in a way that we hadn't before. So it's using the new data available, but also new techniques as well to be able to shed light on that. That's the aim of the project.
And you mentioned EU data. Will we continue to have access to that, or is that going to be barred to us?
That information from the EU is open access.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Rhoda Grant.
We heard earlier that Scottish Enterprise has changed its strategy quite dramatically. And I'm wondering what the board's role is in reviewing that strategy and seeing how it fits with the National Performance Framework.
In terms of aligning I guess the strategic board doesn't get involved in the micromanagement of what Scottish Enterprise will be doing within its operational plan. what we will focus on will be the strategic aims of and ensuring that those are aligned and there is a shared vision between all of the agencies. So it would be a matter for their own boards in the first case as to how they are aligning the activities that they are aligning within their own business plans. We would look at the macroeconomic indicators.
Okay. The Fraser of Allender Institute in a recent report said that there was no evidence of those who obtained support from the enterprise agencies actually experiencing improved turnover and productivity. And do you think the new strategy will impact on that?
Scottish Enterprise's new strategy. I mean, that was a really interesting piece of evidence which came back. Two things on it: that business support did not necessarily align to or show a direct correlation to an increase in productivity. It did have an increase in employment, which does have a positive impact on some of the other macro indicators like well-being, like equality. So it may, if we are looking at the overall productivity basis, then it will hit some of those, it will flex to change and work for some of those macro performance indicators in a different way.
Okay. And you will have heard recent reports about Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise not giving new support to new companies at the moment. I mean, that doesn't help anybody given the economic circumstances. What is your role in trying to get to the bottom of what is affecting their budgets to that extent?
So going back to the strategic board's role, when we looked at evidence 2 years ago around what areas would make a difference to a growth in productivity, we looked at exports, future skills, business models and workplace innovation and business creation and growth. And we asked the agencies to work together to be able to focus on those areas. It is for them to look at what they think is the best way for them to achieve the support of those missions within the framework of their own wider remit. And I think that where the board, again, will look at the high-level areas of how is their strategy impacting on the shift of those higher macro indicators rather than their own individual targets, which their own boards will look at. I do think it's also, when I talked about the alignment of the business plan, the conundrum, I suppose, for some of us business people on the board is that in business, we would create a plan. We would look at where growth sectors were and where areas would be that we would focus investment in on. And then we would align a budget to support that and we would align resources behind that. It's a slightly different world for us in Scottish Government and the enterprise agencies in that government gives an allocation of budget and then the agencies have to almost reverse engineer their plans into what that expenditure is going to be. And what's also become obvious to us as board members is that in terms of budgets, budgets are sometimes allocated in multi-year chunks. Therefore, it's quite difficult when there is a shrinking or a reduction in a budget for the agencies to be able to look across the piece and sustain the same kind of investment that they had been doing to date. And one of the tasks that we had set them before was, if you only have this finite amount of money, how are you going to invest it to best effect and what are you going to stop doing? And I guess that for some of them, they are going to have to make hard choices. And based on the evidence that came through around business support showing increase in employment, but not necessarily in productivity, then again, those are areas where their own boards are going to have to make decisions around where they think that investment will have biggest and best effect.
But if they can't invest at all, then they're not going to meet any of their performance targets.
There are also different ways that funding can be found for different sources. So again, we go back to the creation of the Scottish National Investment Bank. We look at a reinvigoration of industry leadership groups and how they can signpost to different areas or different methods of investment. So I think that, again, it's a system-wide approach. It's not just what Scottish Enterprise or High can do in there, and indeed south of Scotland when it comes into being on the 1st of April, what they do as individual. It's how do we look at this across the piece, and how do we get the agencies to work better together to make better use of that £2.2 billion that that is being spent on the enterprise and skills system.
Can I just ask? It seems to me that then business investment is going to go through the investment bank. Then it kind of begs the question, what is the role of the enterprise agencies if it's not to invest and support business?
Well, I don't think that all investment will go through the Scottish National Investment Bank. I think that there will still be, as far as I can see from what the agencies are still creating their own operational plans at the moment. There will be a focus on account managed companies, but perhaps to a lesser degree, and more of a focus on perhaps that growth area in medium-sized companies that perhaps hasn't had the focus before.
I suppose I go back to my point, if they don't have the money to invest, then how can they make that change?
Unfortunately, we don't have any jurisdiction over the allocation of funding. That's for ministers and the agencies themselves. We can only make recommendations around what areas we think ought to be focused on in terms of driving inclusive economic growth, which were the missions that we agreed during our strategic plan.
Alison Harris.
The committee was told in December 2018 that the analytical unit was using the agency's management information and existing performance frameworks to shed light on the agency's contribution to outcomes and impact. So could you give the committee, please, an update as to how this work is progressing, and when will the committee see the outcomes?
Okay. So one of the key planks of the performance framework is the logic model that underpins the performance framework, and the logic model basically tracks the individual activities from the agencies right the way through to impacts and outcomes, and how it ties in with the strategic board's four aims of raising kind of productivity, sustainability, equality, and well-being. What we have done over the last year is work collectively with the agencies to group the range of activities that they're undertaking across the board within what's called kind of activity bundles. And for each of those activity bundles, we're linking them through to short-term outcomes and longer-term outcomes. And what we're also doing is assessing the strength of the evidence base within each of those activity bundles. There's been a huge amount of work going on to try to establish these kind of, and links to the alignment of the business plans, the short to medium term kind of outcomes that the agencies have. So a lot of the work has gone on to group the range of activities. We're now in the process of assessing the strength of evidence within those activities, with a view that we would then report back to the board and make publicly available what information we've got across the system in terms of the strength of the evidence around where some of the biggest returns are accruing, and where there's key evidence gaps. That work is going on and hoping to conclude in the next couple of months. We're not idle in terms of the rest of the bits of the work. So we've already touched on the work on innovation that's underway that will help inform that piece of the jigsaw. The largest evaluation that we're undertaking at the moment is on the education returns to post-school education and skills. That's a massive investment, the largest bit of investment within the system. That work will conclude towards the end of the year. So we're tracking those activities, and we're going to kind of populate that sort of picture, as it were, of the enterprise and skills system, and we'll make that available to the committee and put that online.
Okay, thank you. So, does the strategic board share the committee's concerns about the challenges in linking enterprise agency spend and activity to outcomes, and existing monitoring activities such as the National Performance Framework?
Yeah, yes, I mean it's very difficult to track the individual activities right the way through to outcomes. The further you get along that chain, the more challenging it is. What we have been doing in collaboration with analytical colleagues within the agencies is drawing together that evidence of those linkages, so that we can track what activities the evidence indicates will have greatest impact. That work is ongoing. One of the areas that we have identified as where we can help facilitate greater collection of data is around innovation, and we've been active with the agencies and we've got a project underway just now to ensure that the right information is collected to enable those types of impacts to be assessed, rather than just simply looking at kind of some of the more output indicators.
Oh, okay, thank you. In June 2019, board minutes noted, I noted that the chair is seeking clarity over funding for the analytical unit and the need for the unit to remain independent. So could I ask the chair to update the committee on the outcome of these discussions?
We are, the analytic unit has its budget for the year. And it has a programme of work which has been agreed by the board. There are 7 full-time equivalent individuals within the analytical unit at the moment.
Okay, and the second part, and the need for the unit to remain independent, is that?
The aim of the unit being established was so that it could look at the data that the agencies produced, the data that Scottish Government produced, and look at it from an objective perspective. And I think that remains the case, that's how we're looking at it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Richard Lyle just wanted to come in with a quick...
Can I ask you a question? I don't think it's really come up yet. Real living wage. I note in 2019, 83.1% of all employees in Scotland received the real living wage, up 2.5 percentage points since 2018, from 80.6%. That's ahead of England, 70.9%, Wales 77.4%, Northern Ireland 74.9%, and the UK on average 79.9%. Can you tell me what part does the board play in promoting the living wage, and do you promote the living wage?
Given that we don't have any jurisdiction over financial allocation, then we can't do you mean within the agencies or within the companies?
I take it you support the living wage,
yes,
and basically you where you can, you through the other people, the organisations, people you're dealing with, that you're actually following that through. Is that the case?
The living wage part of Fair Work agenda, we have asked that all agencies adopt the principles of fair work, and again, as I've said, we are agreeing what the use of language should be, so there is commonality between the agencies. So that's the internal. In looking externally, it will be mandated within, or mandatory within, South of Scotland Agency that all companies that engage with that agency will have to abide by or adhere to the principles of fair work. So that's something that we would encourage the other agencies to be thinking about moving forward.
Thank you.
John Mason, you wanted to come back in.
Thanks again, Convener. Yes, it was to touch on the Audit Scotland report, which I think came out last May, reporting on the Enterprise and Skills Review. And a couple of points came out of that. One of the points they made was that the Strategic Board does not have formal powers to instruct any of the agencies. And listening to your answers, well, to several members, but especially Rhoda Grant and then latterly to Richard Lyle, I mean, you've said things like their own boards can make decisions. You can't make funding decisions for them at all. So do you think Audit Scotland have a fair point, or is it just something to note?
I think it's something to note. I mean, I think that the agency's own board, Scott, you can add your opinions, but I think that, you know, each of the agencies, we are a strategic board, so the operations of the agencies have to be dealt with by their own boards. Our focus has to be on the high level movements, if you like, that we can then come back and hold the agencies to account, but we do not have formal powers over the agencies.
Does the strategic board find that frustrating at times, or are you happy with that?
Well, I think that there is the strategic board is still very young, if you like, in terms of how it's moving, and we're finding, or I suppose honing in on where is are we most purposeful and where do we add value, which is in that whole alignment area. And I think that each of the agencies themselves can't do that as yet, have that collective alignment ability. You know, the first time that, you know, the chairs of the chief executives ever sat round a table was when the strategic board was created, and that was just something which had never happened before. So I think these things will evolve. Scott, you might have a...
Yeah, I think there's... would it be easier to tell or have more powers? I think what we have achieved is the fact that we've had the agencies all in one room, as Nora has said, but I think, as Nora mentioned in her opening statements, one of the biggest things that's been done recent times was just aligning the operational plan. So having the chairs and the heads of the agencies together, aligning their operation plans now around one shared vision. They're now aligned to the same timing plan, so we have the same discussions about outcomes and how they fit into their operational plans. Supporting the strategic plan of the board, they've all signed up to that and built those outcomes into their operational plans, and they have aligned around that. So I think we're making progress with it. It is working with the chairs to make sure, and the CEOs to make sure that they align around that plan, and they align around the government economic strategy and the economic action plan. I think we've seen strong progress, even though we don't have direct empowerment to tell them what to do.
Okay, thank you. I mean, a positive point that Audit Scotland made was that they reckon it's a more joined-up approach from Scottish Government. So when they instruct the different agencies, which comes from different parts of the Scottish Government, then that is more joined up. So that sounds positive. But they do also make the point that in the letters of guidance that agencies get, there's not always very fixed timescales as to what they should do things. Now, I would guess that that's because they're all at different kind of places along a trajectory, and so it will take some of them longer to get there than others. Is that something, do you agree with Audit Scotland? There should maybe be a bit more fixed timescales and so on?
Well, in terms of the business alignment planning processes, that's what we're working towards. You couldn't change it overnight because some of the agencies had already got their plans in place and were indeed implementing them, whereas others hadn't quite started the planning process. What we asked for was, could we start off with a pyramid approach where ministers got their letters of guidance and their priorities very clear, because if you give the agencies a particular brief and then all the briefs aren't joined up, then it's just a recipe for disconnect. So starting with the letters of guidance coming out at the same time, then looking at a timetable where the process could start, but some of the agencies, because they were at a different time scale, we're just now getting them in alignment. So I think that that's something that we will see going forward, a much more joined up approach. We gave, in the strategic plan, we gave 18 recommendations to Scottish Government. Part of those were around how they flexed and looked at presenting the directions that they give to the agencies in conjunction with one another.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to sort of round it off, I want to talk about international activities. This is the area that the committee are going to look at with the enterprise companies in terms of our review this year. But I see that you noted in the June 2019 minutes that the Scottish Government spending review would be an opportunity for the system to work together better, for example, in the international space and in sharing services. So I wondered if you could expand on what issues are currently in the international space.
Okay, I think the issue there was obviously looking at the fact that not enough of Scottish businesses were exporting, and how do we actually really give a boost to that. And certainly a goal of the First Minister as well, in terms of very strong in that. So the best example of that was around about working on as Nora mentioned in the opening statement, the trading nation. So the exporting mission, which looked at engaging all both Scottish Government and the One Scotland approach through Scottish Government enterprise agencies, and also supporting the education, tourism and specific industrial sectors. We looked at all of that and how we could boost that, and the outcome of that was our exporting mission, which led into the trading nation outcome, and that was the main delivery mechanism for our plan to boost that. And I think that's been taken on now by Scottish Government and has been very successful as a programme, but it's still in the early days.
It's been very successful as a programme. On what measures have you used?
I just mean from a point of view in terms of we've now got one approach and one plan, and I think we need to measure the outcomes of that, and it's a little bit early to say that, but from an approach I think we've had a very broad engagement from industry and tourism and the sectors, so I think we're actually seeing a more cohesive plan now.
So you would expect us, as we go through our work programme,
Absolutely,
to see
yeah.
some positive on
We
that?
would expect to see positive outcomes from that, yes, but I think we need to look at the indicators, but it's a little bit early to be telling the outcome of that, but I would feel that given we have one plan and one joined up approach, we should be seeing a stronger outcome from that.
And one plan that will suit all sectors?
It suits the priority sectors, but there's still more work to do to engage other sectors, but in terms of the key sectors we identify as having the ability to export, that's where the focus is.
Okay. Dean Lockhart, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to follow up on international activities, I think it was announced last year there would be a review of the Global Scot network. I wonder if the panel can provide us with an update on where that review is at.
Not specifically, you want to? No. I think we need to take that one away. Certainly it was an outcome to go look at how we re-energise the Global Scot activity, and that certainly was an agreed action. I don't have a personal update, so we need to take that one away and come back to you on that one.
Is that something under the oversight of the strategic board? Is that something you would have oversight over?
It would be part of the looking at export indicators, but I mean that's more an operational activity that I know that Scottish Enterprise has been looking at. So the strategic board will get a report back, as it would do when it's looking at exports, as you know, getting an update on the mission. So it would be a question that we would feed in as to how has that been re-energised or how has it been restructured. But it's not something that we would have direct influence over, right, unless it was not showing that it was helping.
Okay, but having looked at the export strategy, did you think the Global Scot network does need re-energised or
yes,
reformed in some way?
I would say that as a business person. Yes, I think that it's not used in as proactively a way as it could be used.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions, members? No. In that case, it turns to me to thank you very much for the evidence you've given. Is there anything you want to add that you feel we've missed or we haven't raised during the session?
No, I would have to say I think you've been very thorough in your questioning, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to come in and speak with you.
Well, thank you. And if anything else does arise, you know, we'd be happy to take anything in writing from you subsequently. So at that point, can I thank you for your attendance, and we'll move into private session. So we'll just take a 5-minute break while we get organised. Thank you.